Oh, it does a countdown. Wonderful. Okay, so it's really great to welcome you to the first of our Google Hangouts for the 2015 Peer-to-Peer University Open Research course. My name is Beck Pitt, and I'm a researcher on the OER Research Hub project, and it's great to have you all with us today. I've been focusing mainly on my work with the OER Research Hub on open textbooks and learning, and I have with me my colleague Rob. Rob, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Rob Farrow. I'm also a researcher on the Open Education Research Hub project. We've recently been rebranded to OER Research Hub.
Yes.
I mainly work across areas of the project. I work on the mapping stuff, the curation stuff. I've got some philosophical stuff and stuff I'm working involved with as well.
That's great, thanks Rob. And it's great to have all three of you here today. I wondered if you, it'd be great to find out a bit more about you, or if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Can I just say something quick?
Yeah, sure.
Because if people, I'm not sure if people are familiar with Google Hangouts or not, but when you make noise, the camera will automatically flip to you. So if you don't want to be on camera, put your microphone on silent or something, because if you cough or someone walks in the room or something like that, the recording switches to whoever's making the noise. So just something to be aware of. Remember last time we were doing this and someone was being called for their dinner or something.
Yes,
so it kept going back to them like every time.
Yeah, we probably want to avoid those.
So just something to be aware of with Google Hangouts.
Yeah, so okay, that's an advanced warning. Yeah, we are recording, so
Part two is, are there no PR questions? Ooh, my just not okay.
So yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay. Ooh, okay, that's a shame. Okay, so I just wondered if people are here wanted to introduce themselves and just tell us a bit more about themselves, their interest around open research, what brought them to the course, and that would be really great. So I'll just turn it over to you guys.
Shall I speak? Can you hear me? Yeah.
That's great.
My name's Graham Steele, based in Glasgow, and I've been involved in open research, open access, open data, open science from around about 2006. One of my titles is with the Open Knowledge Foundation. I'm the sort of lead coordinator for Scotland for open science, and my day job is a community manager at a text and data mining service called Content Mine.
Fabulous, that's wonderful. It's great to meet you, Graham. Leah, I don't know if you've got your microphone or you've got the facility to speak, or if you wanted to introduce yourself in the chat box. Wonderful, thanks. That's great. So, because the chat, I'm not sure if this chat's saved. So, Leo was saying that he's a learning technologist. Ooh, and the chat's disappeared. Open it up. Okay, great. So I'm going to read out the chat because I know that it doesn't save on Google Hangouts. So Leo says, I'm a learning technologist with an interest area in open education and have done some research in it as well. So that's great. Thanks, Leo. It's great to have you you here. Okay, so what we thought we'd do is kind of work through some of the sections of the course and just find out what you guys were thinking about some of the ideas that are being discussed and stuff that's coming up on the Hangouts, sorry, not the Hangouts, in the forums, and so on. So I wanted we started off the course by talking a bit about openness and what openness kind of means to you personally, and what open research means. So it was quite nice to kind of see in 1.1, when we were talking about openness in general, some of the ideas that were coming through, issues around, someone came up with a nice phrase actually, give what you can, take what you need, to kind of express the kind of ethos of openness, which I thought was quite nice. I did a number of other people. Someone else talked about vulnerability. I think Alana described openness as a social justice enabler. So there's a real sense of kind of the importance of community and a kind of global nature of openness kind of coming through. I wondered what people thought of those kind of discussions, or what ideas you had, or maybe if you didn't contribute to the forums, that you've been thinking about so far this week.
So maybe I should get us rolling.
Yeah,
so it's interesting that we find sort of similar things that we found before in terms of quite a wide spectrum of opinion around what openness is. So for some people, you have the idea that it's really just about things being free online, being available at low cost online, that kind of thing. There's also this kind of more, I suppose, more general idea about spontaneity and randomness and kind of unfettered freedom to do this, that, the other, which I would say, yeah, that's probably a big part of it too. But it's not that kind of, it's not free for all, you know, to me. It's actually more about specifying what kind of freedoms you're able to do, what kind of possibilities are presented by open licensing or open release of materials and that kind of thing. I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but I have been sort of trying to arrive at an idea about what openness is, what's the sort of essence of this kind of openness, because you get a lot of overlap, but you don't get clear distinction saying this is exactly what it means to be open in a way that transcends context. So in this context it means this, in this context it means this, and so on. So at the moment I'm tending to think of openness as a kind of, as the absence of restrictions. And so because you think of it as an absence, it's a kind of negative definition. So it explains why it's hard to define, because really you're talking about the absence of something. So it might be the absence of copyright, for instance, not having to pay a certain amount to access a journal article anymore, and that kind of thing. So you end up with all these kind of negative definitions. And in a way, the challenge is how far can we convert negative definitions into positive ones? I'm thinking about some of the comments we've had around social justice, for instance. Yes, you can have a negative idea of openness, might not get you that far towards an idea of social justice. So there's one thing I'm kind of thinking about that now in relation to the other work I've been doing around this sort of definitions stuff and things like that. So yeah, there's a kind of confluence of lots of different stuff around very technical procedural things like licensing, how do you release data openly in such a way that people can use it, to these much more kind of sort of philosophical or cultural ideas around how should we value knowledge, how should we share knowledge more abstractly.
Yeah, no, thanks.
So there's my 2 pennies.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's really useful. And I'm just kind of thinking back over some of the contributions in the course as well. And Leo, thanks for all the stuff that you've been putting in the chat box. I'm just going to come back to that and pick up on what you're saying in a second. Somebody did mention in the forum in 1.1 about reuse and acknowledging sources, and the importance of acknowledging, you know, who originally authored a source, even if obviously an open license gives you the ability to not have to seek permission to reuse it, and so on. So I think that's an important point as well. So just going to look down and pick up. I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Sorry, I've been talking quite a bit, but Leo, yeah, no, it's totally cool that it's your you know, the Hangouts are a place for everyone to kind of come and talk about things. So although it kind of says in the course, like, yeah, it would be great if you'd done a few sections before coming along, it's definitely not like you must you must kind of do that before coming. It's just great to have you here. So Leo also says, some people think that there is a problem with not pinning down the meaning, but I do think this is quite a productive area to open up discussion and debate around values. At Alt C last week, both Laura
Chernovitz.
Thank you. Chernovitz and Catherine Cronin made a point of saying open is not for its own sake, which is important, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think there are definitely different schools of thought around whether you need to define this stuff. And some people will say, actually, look, it's the very kind of indeterminate nature of it, the fact that it resists a final definition. That's what's good about it. And other people will say we're at risk of just kind of ending up in confusion because we're talking about different things in different contexts and that kind of thing. What I would take from Leo's comment is the idea that of open for open's sake. So there are people who will kind of, if you like, they're the kind of evangelists or the sort of super advocates for open approaches, and it has to be open and there's no other way of doing things. I wouldn't personally kind of go down that road, but I did think we got some interesting comments in the next section, which maybe we can come back to, and pick up that idea about whether or not it's all or nothing, if you like, being open.
That's great. And Leo says, I think you have to consider why you want it open. So, Graham, thanks for your comment. Yeah, Martin was with us on the call earlier, but then dropped out, so I can hear.
He probably dropped out so that there'd be a place free.
Yeah, but yeah, by all means, if Martin's able to, that would be great. Graham, I know you've got your mic muted. I wondered if you had anything that you wanted to add at this point.
Not really per se. As I say, I only found out about this about 40 minutes ago on Twitter.
Even more wonderful to have you with us. You're here.
Very efficient.
Yeah.
My background is more open science as opposed to open education. But for example, I don't know if you can see this, but I think you know Steve Wheeler.
Yes.
Do you know him?
Yes.
Steve Wheeler.
Yeah, personally signed copy. But with regards to open education, we touched upon that briefly at the latest Open Data Glasgow event 2 nights ago with Ian Stewart. I don't know if you know Ian, but he's a pretty cool open education kind of person. So, my background is more the general openness as opposed to specific open education stuff. But I'm always keen to learn. So I'm here to lurk and I shall interject when prodded, or unless I've got something that springs to mind. But these hanging out online for any purpose is good, yeah. And Hangouts is not perfect, but it's pretty good. It's free. The quality of Hangouts is not fantastic, but you get what you pay for. But for things like this, it's perfect.
Well, yeah, we found quite initial on my user issues with Hangouts. It does work pretty well. So that's great. And thank you. That's really interesting. Okay, wonderful. So I don't know if anybody had anything else they wanted to add in.
So we've got some stuff from the HackPad.
Okay, great.
Regina was asking about the difference between open licensing, open access, and open research. And I've just put in the notes there. Briefly, open licenses can be applied to any creative work, and they specify what someone can legally do with that work. It's worth bearing in mind that you have to have the copyright in the first place in order to apply an open license to something. So if you don't already own the copyright to something, you can't openly license it. And then those licenses will then say, depending on what they are and how the licenses are set up, you can access this, you can reproduce it, you can copy it, you can mix it up in other ways, you can kind of edit it and change it and so on. So open licenses set out a kind of set of permissions. And open access, I mean, that's a more complex issue, I would say, but most people understand open access to be a way of publishing materials, especially scientific papers, in such a way that people can access them at little or no cost to themselves. So often the easiest way to do that is to put it on an open license so that other people can access it and share it and so on. But with regards to open research, I think that's an even more complicated one, and I don't really have a kind of quick answer, actually. And that's really, I suppose, what the whole 4 weeks is about exploring in more detail.
Yes, yeah. I guess there's a sense that you're trying to look at all the different stages of the research process and how you can be more open in those things. So in the example of, when we do use the example of the OER Research Hub, it points in the course, but I mean, we try to, for example, I think this is talked about a bit later on in the course to do with dissemination and reflection, but once we'd carried out a particular piece of research, we often blogged the findings, for example, and then before publishing papers, peer-reviewed papers and so on. And we were quite open about our methodologies. We put our survey questions and made those available online along with other kind of researcher tools to try and kind of open up what we were doing as a project, which has been kind of successful in terms of people, for example, there's a project Raw 4D in South Africa, and those guys, for example, have looked at our survey questions and used them. So there are kind of examples of reuse and stuff. So it's kind of opening up that process and kind of enabling people to kind of see what you're doing and how you're doing it.
And to me, I would say open research is sort of more about the process than it is about what you're studying.
Yes.
So in the case of OER Research Hub, we've been doing open research into OER, for example, MOOC and so on. So openness is the focus of the study, but the method of open research, I think you could apply to any research question. It's really a question of, how do you approach the different elements of a research process, and what difference does openness make to each of those as you're going along? And I think that's more or less how the course is structured, right? It sort of goes through the process of setting up a research project, thinking about the sort of ethical implications, thinking about the methodologies and so on, through to the dissemination.
And it may not be, and because it's a process and because there's different components to it, it may be that it's not necessarily appropriate or feasible for you to be open at particular stages. That's a bad way of putting it, but you may decide that you want to, for example, blog about your project or about your research as it develops, but maybe you don't necessarily release your data in the open later on, and there may be particular reasons for that, particularly when dealing with data to do with, for example, other people and so on. I just want to read a couple of, I'm seeing there's some great stuff in the chat box, so I'm just going to kind of go through that in a second. And I should have explained earlier on when we started the call that we've got the Hackpad on the go, which you guys have obviously seen. So I can see that we've got a viewer as well. So I'm going to say hello to whoever that is. It's great to have you here. We're also using the Open Research hashtag on Twitter. So if people are asking things through these channels, then we're going to feed them into the discussion. Yeah, sorry, that's what we've got so many different things kind of on the go. So just to recap on the chat box. Oh, it's great, Graham, to introduce you to the hub and what we do and stuff. That's really cool. So Leo says, I think open peer review is gaining traction. Opening up the survey instrument is a great idea. And Graham says, yes, it is, Leo. I'm all for open peer review. So that's great, and thanks for the nice comments as well.
I do think open peer review is coming closer. There's now there are now online services that will sort of represent the activity of reviewers. So normally reviewing academic data is something you don't really get any credit for anyway. You just kind of go and do it, and then it goes off, and then your part in it is anonymous, basically. But now you'll be able to kind of almost have like a badging system or something like that that will say you've been reviewing for this journal, or you've done this many reviews for this journal, and that kind of thing. that's becoming a bit more public in the first place. Obviously, you do have some kind of, I know in physics, the archive repository encourages open kind of forms of peer review as well. It'd be interesting I mean, I think there are issues around how you would do it, but it'd be very interesting to sort of compare how people responded to open peer review, whether it was actually a better process with a sort of human face on the other end of it, someone critiquing your work, or whether the anonymity actually has some sort of positive effect on the whole process. I don't personally know which is the case, but it'd be quite an interesting thing to do some work on. So,
I mean,
sorry.
In terms of open peer review, you've got in terms of journals, you've got quite a few of the BAME central journals allow open peer review. F1000 Research, I don't know about eLife, but with regards to PeerJ, it's not mandatory. But I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but I think roughly between 60 and 70% choose to do open peer review, even though they don't have to. So I've seen a small amount of negative feedback with regards to open peer review, but by far the majority of feedback that I've seen has been positive.
That's really interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's more part of the culture in science.
Yeah.
In the humanities, which both Beck and I have our background in, because maybe it's all a little bit more personal and opinionated with these kind of things. Anonymity is still very much the norm, I would say, for these things.
With regards to humanities, that's something that I've only started to get involved in over the last couple of years after I found out about Open Library of Humanities. But in terms of them and open peer review, I don't personally know, so I can quite easily. I don't know if you guys know. If not, I shall tweet Martin.
Ooh, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
They launch on the 28th of this month.
Thanks.
With no article processing charges. Right, I'll tweet Mark.
That's great, thank you. That's awesome. I'm just going to read out what Leo's been putting some stuff in the chat box. So, Leo says, I'm doing a project where we've had reviewers commenting openly to the authors via Google Docs. It worked great. I would say that there can be issues to negotiate, but you have to work through them. And then no NPC is great. Thanks, Leo.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see how that would end up being the norm. And I personally wouldn't be bothered by having my name attached to my comments or something like that. But it's one of those traditions, those academic traditions that might be quite a long time to change, I think. So the only other thing that I just wanted to say before we kind of moved on was the idea that that openness can be, a spectrum, I suppose, of stuff. It's not all or nothing kind of process. So you can have projects that are a bit open, or open in some respects, but not others, and there can be good reasons for that. And I think, as Leo made the point, you've got to know what your reasons are for why you're being open, other than the fact that you think it, sounds cool, or it's the future, or something like that. Because, as we'll see next week, there can be quite serious kind of repercussions if you're not careful. And sometimes when we're being open, we're kind of we're acting separately to a lot of the protections that we put in place in various ways around data security and privacy and that kind of thing. So there's some quite kind of areas where you need to be quite sort of careful, I suppose. But that's not to say that I wouldn't encourage people to explore openness or explore what they could do in the context of a research project. It's more just to kind of say that I suppose we're not trying to kind of convert people necessarily, but just trying to get them to think a bit more about this kind of stuff.
That's good. I'm just picking up on the comments. That's great. Thanks, Graham. Yeah.
So one thing that just coming up in the hack pad, and this came up in the forum activity too, is the idea of crowdsourcing
Mm.
and the extent to which crowdsourcing should be considered a feature of open research. I hadn't really thought about it too much in those terms before, but and my instinct is to say it's not a necessary part of open research, but in practice, sort of crowdsourcing information and crowdsourcing contributions is leveraging openness to be able to do that in the first place. So it's an output of being open that you can do that kind of crowdsourcing. Of course, sharing what you crowdsource back, that would then be openness, not as an output, but as a process, I would say. So you're disseminating openly, you're collecting the stuff, and then sharing it openly back to people. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts about that.
Just going to quickly catch up on the comments a little while ago. Leo was saying in relation to anonymous peer review, if you're ashamed of your comments, maybe don't make those comments. I would agree. I think sometimes.
But it might not be that you're ashamed. It might be that you're just very sensitive to upsetting somebody, right? So it might be that you get asked to review a colleague's work, right? And it might be that you want to say, look, I just don't agree with this, that, the other, but there could be some implications. The anonymity could then work quite well for you to be able to say what you really think, but not having any, disagreements with somebody or any conflict with somebody. Maybe that's just a very selective example. I can see how, because sometimes when you're talking about very specific kind of academic areas, it might be that there's only 6 experts in the world, and they know each other anyway, right? So,
I suppose that, there are those kind of situations. But
so I don't know about that. But if people are in the spirit of being used to being criticised openly, maybe that wouldn't be such a big thing,
Yeah, no, that's that's great. Thanks, Leo, for clarifying. That's great. I'm just gonna read through. That's great. Okay, wonderful. And there's a link as well, which I'm going to look at a bit later.
So we can cut and paste all of that chat into the Hackpad at the end, right?
So we can share that.
Because it's not saved in Google.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to move on to talk about open research rather than just sort of openness generally?
Oh, okay, cool. So the links to do with picking up the crowdsourcing theme. Yeah, I think so. That would be great. Thanks for posting that. That's great, Leo. Okay, cool. So I don't know if anyone else had anything that they wanted to add in at this point, or guys. Okay. Well, that's great. So kind of want to move on and think a bit more about, well, I guess we've kind of already been discussing it anyway, which is to do with the nature of open research and different people's thoughts about what open research means. There were some videos a little later, in about the middle of week 1 as well, that that you might have had a chance to explore, where different people are talking about what they think open research is, what it means to them. We had a bit of discussion going on, with some really big discussion going on in the chat as well, which I thought was quite interesting. So some of the themes that were coming out of that, there was somebody was talking about, I think it was in relation to open access. So they had experience of, or they were involved in open access, but the kind of association with open research was with kind of funded projects, with being given money to carry out a project, of perhaps being part of an institution, and so on. I think this is mentioned somewhere in the course, the idea of guerrilla research, something that Martin has done some, okay, I won't spoil it for next week, but there is a section in the course on where we mentioned guerrilla research and the idea that of using, for example, open data or another kind of open, excuse me, resource to kind of carry out your own kind of freestyle, almost research, kind of outside of institutional context. But yeah, I do wonder if open research maybe, does have those kind of connotations to people. There was also a discussion around open research in the sense of using only open resources or referencing only open materials in your own research. And there was a response to that by Lana, I think, who talked about, well, actually that would mean, because of the current state of play, basically, that you would be omitting a whole lot of research that's being carried out, and would mean that you weren't kind of giving a full review, a full literature review, which I thought was an interesting point.
Yeah, I've never actually heard anyone make the suggestion before that open research is research where you only use open access articles and kind of do a literature review on them or something.
I thought it was interesting though.
Certainly that's something that's become possible with open access publication and greater sort of ease of access to these things. But I think that kind of brings us back slightly to this point about, you know, whether or not we should be sort of evangelist for open, right? Because in a way, it's, you know, to me, open research is still research, right? So what's research? It's about finding answers to questions, and finding out how to phrase your question properly and how to find evidence that counts for or against it and that kind of thing. Yeah. So we're okay with that provisional definition.
Yeah. I briefly say that this issue came up 2 or 3 days ago with the hashtag Wikigate. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
That was where Elsevier were going to be partnering with 45 authors at Wikipedia to give them free access to paywalled stuff, so that they essentially only link to Elsevier papers. That's oversimplified, but that link I've just pasted, that was from Glenn Moody, and yeah, I think it was Michael Eisen was leading the charge against it, and then the main editor from Wikipedia pitched in towards the end of that thread. But it's definitely worth a sort of very interesting subject.
Oh, that's great. That's really useful.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the general kind of thing I was trying to sort of allude to was the idea of being sort of a bit sort of dogmatic almost about being open. So I'm open, so I'm only going to use open access papers. I wouldn't personally recommend that. I would say, well, use what you can get. You know, it's easier to use stuff that's openly available, but you shouldn't restrict yourself to that, in my view. At the other end of the scale, I mean, there is room, I think, for being an advocate of being open, kind of encouraging openness. I wouldn't personally say don't use anything if it's not openly licensed. You could say, look, there's an obligation. There's more of an obligation with the dissemination side of things. So there's more of an obligation for you to disseminate openly than there is to only use open materials. As long as people keep doing that, then what's out there available openly continues to grow. The commons continues to grow. Then eventually, there is only open stuff, maybe. So obviously, that's the kind of thing that Elsevier doesn't really want to see. Behind the strategy.
We've got a guest.
Hello, hi.
Oh, that's El Martini.
Oh, great to have you with us.
Okay, so thinking about the research process and how there's sort of open possibilities at different levels. You start off, I mean, most of the time people start with some sort of literature review or assessment of what's already out there, which you could do only using open material. You could crowdsource it in a way. You could do, you can use open technology to try and give us a better understanding of the question you're trying to answer. In our research hub, when it came to actually designing methodologies for doing the research, we did something a little bit unusual there because we did it in collaboration. So we would work with, Sailor Academy or OpenStax, kind of work out which of the questions that are most relevant. How are we going to? So in a way, we opened up the research process in a way that is not typical for research scientists. So we allow people to sort of influence the design of that, not necessarily to make it less robust, but to make it more appropriate to that context. And I think in some ways there was kind of an openness or sharing. You might want to turn off your microphone if you don't want to be captured on the recording, because as soon as you make a noise or your phone goes off or anything like that, the camera goes straight to you. So if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. So yeah, there's sort of elements to the sort of design process that you can make more open. Another way of doing that, for example, you could try and validate your research methodology by sharing it online, inviting comment, almost having a peer review of the methodology, which is done in the open. El Martini, you keep taking over the report. I don't think you mean to, though.
Oh. Yeah, you might.
Great, you're now muted.
Okay,
Thank you.
Awesome.
So yeah, there's an opening up of the sort of process there. I think in terms of our own collection of survey data, we had these open collectors that anyone could come along and just kind of contribute to, and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's every stage of the process you can do that, but especially with dissemination. So with dissemination, it becomes possible to, you're now the copyright holder of your work. So you have the ability to then license that openly, put it on a blog, make it into an open access publication, and so on. So in some ways, the dissemination thing is the most important because that's the one that has the greatest impact on other people. But I think you can look at all the different elements of the research process and think, actually, how can openness make a difference to that? And the main way that I suppose openness itself is kind of influencing this thing is partly through the open data. So the guerrilla research stuff, which we'll talk more about next week, this kind of do-it-yourself approach to research. If you're outside an institution, you don't have a university that you work at or anything like that, it's possible now to just kind of pull in data from various places that's publicly available, do mashups, do calculations no one's done before. And we've also released our own data from OER Research Hub as a data set with the idea that others can sort of do the same. So for us, I suppose, our story is we've really tried to be open at all the different points of that process. And it's worked generally pretty well. I mean, there's obviously things you have to be aware of around security and sort of the ethics stuff. But we haven't sort of struggled to find applications for this.
No. And I think just to pick up on what you were saying, there's a lot more government initiatives or kind of funding body initiatives, for example, where there is this requirement now to publish your data and research in the open now, which particularly with growing numbers of data sets and so on, gives more opportunities for people to kind of go and have access and to data that maybe they didn't have before. Got some more great stuff happening in the chat box here. So Leo said earlier, I think also you have to bear in mind these categories are not absolutes, e.g. a paywalled article may well be available via green open access.
Yeah, good point.
Hi Martin Tainer as well, it's great to have you with us and thanks for introducing yourself. Paywalled article may be available, yeah. And then Leo says, it's a bit frustrating when papers on openness topics are paywalled.
Indeed. So we had this issue. We had this issue ourselves, where we published an article in the British Journal of Educational Technology over the summer. Well, I say article. It's not really an article.
It's a description of it.
It's a description of our data set and where you can find it and all that sort of thing. We thought when we submitted to that special issue that it was going to be published on open access, but it turned out that it wasn't. But we sort of stuck with it because we thought, well, actually, there's nothing new. There's no novel findings, or there's nothing in that paper that you can't find elsewhere within our stuff.
In our report.
Evidence reports, papers that we're writing, and that kind of thing. It is the only thing that we've published that's behind a paywall. But the fact is, it's the second-ranked journal for EdTech, at least on Google Scholar at the moment. And we still have a pressure on us as academics to publish in high, highly ranked journals. So even though we're a totally open project at the Open University, we can't get away from that obligation. But yeah, the data set, Leo, is open.
Yeah, the data set's open.
It's on Figshare.
Yeah.
And it's openly licensed as well, and we encourage reuse.
Yeah. The description of the data set is pretty much as in our evidence report that Rob's saying. That's openly available for you to download in PDF format, I think, on our website. I think it kind of is one of the first things you'll see when you go to the OER Hub website. So yeah,
so if you go to oerresearchhub.org right now, Bayer's recently been publishing these sort of short breakdown reports for different sections of the data set, and there's links there back to the data set.
Yes, there is, yeah.
So that's an easy way to find it.
You can see the data set as well then.
But yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky.
And in a way, it would be very easy for us to go, oh, okay, clean hands, only open access publication. But the truth is that would only get us so far as academics. And
although in fairness, everything else was publishing open access, so it's kind of like, you know, we've got stuff going into open access journals and stuff. I'm working on something for Rod.
Oh yeah, everything else is open access completely. But it's just a difficult area to get the balance actually between, you know, which are the journals that are being read, which are the ones that are being cited. If you want your work to have a high profile, they're the ones you publish in, they're rarely open. But it's not so bad for us, because in the OER world, most of the main journals are open. If you're working in a health field, it might be harder for you to justify a publication like that, especially if you have institutional pressure, saying that you want to publish in these journals or whatever.
Yeah.
And thanks, Graham, for publishing a link to Martin Eve's piece as well. How ironic are the open access irony rules. Yeah, we'll post that in the hack pad. So yeah, I don't know if anyone had anything that they wanted to bring in at this point. Okay.
So I've got a couple of things from the exercises that people were invited to do. There's only a couple of people that have done it. This is the one for the advantages and challenges of open research, which maybe we could spend a few minutes just discussing. So the advantages that were given in this case, so Gail says one advantage is the possibility of getting feedback at the right time to influence what you're doing. So she's talking about sharing research questions and methodology and a plan, that kind of thing. The challenge associated with that is a kind of hesitation because someone else might see it, steal it, take it, claim credit for it, maybe use it quicker and make your work look like it's the one that's derived from theirs rather than vice versa. And says that, well, one way of dealing with that situation would be to invite collaboration. So rather than saying, I am the owner of this work, you say, look, I'm working on this, I want to collaborate. So you bring people in and you share energy, basically. Another comment from Alana, who's thinking more about in terms of dissemination. And she sort of says that, well, if you're disseminating openly, the advantage is you can potentially have a much wider coverage than you would if you were behind a paywall. I think there's quite a lot of sort of evidence that suggests open publication is cited more than publication behind a paywall. And the challenge she associates with that is that for certain areas of expertise, they just don't really operate on the basis of open access publication. So if you were trying to get into a certain kind of area or be heard in a certain sort of discourse, limiting yourself to open access dissemination would be restrictive, potentially. So partly that's, I suppose, that's really a question about choosing the right sort of methods for dissemination, the right channels. And I suppose knowing your audience is part of that as well. Obviously, there are other ways to disseminate. So maybe some stuff you would put on a blog. It's out there, but it's got your name on it. It's timestamped. So if anyone does plagiarize it, you can, their openness is giving you a way to show, actually, I was the first one to say that. So So they're just a couple of kind of challenges and possible responses. I don't know if anyone else wants to share any thoughts they have around advanced disadvantages, challenges, solutions. Leo, that was very clever. You can mute other people. We should know how to do that. That would be very helpful.
I only found out about that fairly recently. Just one issue that springs to mind with regards to choosing where to publish and the assumption that the stuff that's behind a paywall, you can't do anything with it. That's not strictly true in the UK, thanks to the Hargreaves legislation last year that allowed researchers to text and data mine any content. So what we do at Content Mine at the moment, we just mine open access papers. That we have written software that can mine closed papers, but yet you have to have legitimate access to those paywall papers. There are restrictions that the publishers put upon us and others, but until the law was made clear by Hargreaves last year, it was simply unclear as to what the legality of doing that was, but yeah, the publishers don't like it, but that's the change in the law. So yeah, so even if stuff is behind a paywall, you can actually do stuff with it. And what we're trying to do is get that UK exception expanded to the whole of Europe. So we're working very hard on it. Yeah. Anyway, just let me pass on.
Thank you. Any other comments around sort of the benefits or the challenges of including open approaches?
While everyone's having a think, just to quickly read out, Leo commented earlier, it's a big concern. I hear one trying to suggest open licensing, others taking work in progress. So
yeah, I mean, I used to be worried about that at some level. But now I think actually blogging stuff is the best way of showing that you had the idea first. It's all out there, it's all time-stamped. No one can say that that's not your work. So I tend to think that that's a way that openness becomes a solution rather than the problem, personally. But it's a very common view. Yeah. And also, I suppose the thing is, philosophers, one of the things they always sort of told us was, not to share your stuff, because in a way, a good philosopher, the thing that you have, if you like, is an idea, and maybe the fear is not so much that someone steals your text, but someone steals the idea underlying it.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, for example, called someone's conference presentation or that kind of thing. Sometimes people will go, oh no, kind of. So there's a bit of a.
There's also a similar fear about being taught, so being filmed while teaching. Yeah. So some people will say, once my employer has recordings of all my lectures, then they might just sack me because they put all the lectures and so on. Yeah. I don't think. I mean, personally, I would say that can't be the only value to the universities, these lectures. But it's a very real worry for academics that if they give up their IP and make it open, there's no value for the institution having them there anymore. They can just be got rid of and someone else brought in, take what they've got and so on. I think that's quite a common worry.
Yeah, as Leo says, like putting it up on YouTube or something like this, and the whole world can kind of see what you're doing. Leo and Graham also kind of commented on the using Google Scholar and the importance of kind of knowing how to use that. Graham's also followed up with a link on what he was saying. There's an article called "The Right to Read is the Right to Mine." So we'll be posting that in the box. And Leo's just commented, it's important to keep stressing that academics are not content.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So we're just moving into the last sort of 5 minutes now.
Yes.
I'm not sure if there was stuff you wanted to cover.
We're kind of freestyling really. So it's whether people have got things that a burning urge to kind of share with everyone, or thoughts that they've been having as we've been talking in the last 15 minutes. So yeah, I'll turn it over, I guess, to you
Any
guys.
any final kind of questions, thoughts, comments?
And sorry, we should have said hello to Regina as well. Sorry for not saying hello earlier.
I've been having some problems trying to connect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I totally understand. Thanks for joining us. The recording
Even
will,
if it's the last 5 minutes.
yeah, we will have the recording up on YouTube, so you've got time and you can catch up. Martin's still question. I'd like to ask regarding question 3, what does open research mean to others? If considered that the educational programs are thinking about form for open access.
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Yeah, sorry, Mark.
It considered that the educational programs are thinking about form or open access. Can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah,
and try and answer
sorry,
it.
Mark.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one more since maybe clarifying for a couple of minutes.
Well, what's interesting to me is the idea of open research, and you just talked a little bit about the concern of being scooped, or the concern of others getting access to things and using your ideas versus using the data. And I think for me as a researcher, that distinction is very much a concern. We do live in this publish or perish kind of background, and so balancing the open research with this fear of being scooped is really kind of walking a tightrope.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, no, it is a concern for many people. I think how to kind of.
It's partly because it's also new, and there aren't kind of well-established ways of doing it, especially in terms of institutional recognition. So if you had a clear set of guidelines from your institution that says, this is what we expect, and this is kind of how we think it's going to work, and these are the benefits, and blah, 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 and that was just a standard thing, maybe that would be less of a concern. The thing is, we're moving from an older paradigm. Now we have the internet, we have all these kind of ways of communicating, and sharing information and that kind of thing. And we're still kind of finding our way, I think, in terms of establishing norms and accepted ways of doing it.
Yes, and I think that's kind of reflected by when we were talking earlier about some of the contributions, talking about only using open research articles for your own research and stuff like this. We're in a place where it's kind of, I guess, transitioning. There's a lot of change in the way that things are being done. Leo says it's definitely is for many of us, Regina. I agree. But I also agree getting your ideas out there early is actually helpful. So yeah, coming back to maybe what Rob was saying about disseminating and blogging, and that you've got a record of when you had ideas or when you kind of chose to share them with people. Graham says, on the concern of being scooped, check out the Open Notebook Science. So there'll be another link in the hackpad afterwards. And then Leo says, especially once people accept citation of blog posts or other publication formats, that would help a lot. No, that's great. Yeah, definitely. A bit of a change of foot. But I think it just there are. I think we'll be returning again to touch on some of these concerns as we go through the course. I think because there is, it's kind of been talking about a concern around, if I get my ideas out there, if I would, and open, other people who are maybe less kind of, speakers might take advantage of that. Yes, and yes, the LSE Impact Lab is very helpful in these matters. They do have some really good articles. So if you're watching this and you haven't had the opportunity to see some of the publications on there, do go and check it out because they very regularly have really useful posts around the kind of topics that we've been talking about. So we're just it's dead on 4 o'clock. I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in and say anything before we go.
Hi. How you doing? Did you
Thanks for posting that, Glenn. So that's just in the LSE impact law page. Okay, guys. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been really nice, really good to be talking with you, and I hope that you've enjoyed the session today. We'll be coming back to things we've discussed and talking about new stuff as the course moves on. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to research in the open and stay ethical. So, yes, we'll be back again next Thursday. Sorry,
Same time next week.
Same time next week. Yeah, sorry, I lost track of that. So yeah, 3 o'clock British Summer Time next week. So thanks so much for joining us, and yeah, thanks to you all for your contributions and for taking time out to be here. That's really great.
Just a closing comment from me. It's always fun to find events just before they take place. And yeah, I guess folk who wouldn't join something unless they get some sort of interest. But that was very illuminating, and thanks everybody.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. Thanks for coming along. That's great. Thanks ever so much, everyone, and hope to speak with you again.
What's going on?
Whoa!
Oh, hello.
I've been smoking weed, innit?